I'm Jim Longworth, and welcome to another edition of Triad Today, coming to you once again from our home away from home, the Senior Botanical Garden in Kernersville. We'll tell you more about them later on. And later on, by the way, is when our roundtable shows up. We'll get into all sorts of controversial issues there, so stay tuned. And I hope you'll stay tuned for the entire half hour. Some great guests, important information coming your way, including some information that parents might find helpful as well. But first, we want to start out talking about inclusion, especially as it relates to the workplace, and two experts in that field, both from Inmar Intelligence. We welcome them. On my immediate right, Fred Jorgensen is General Counsel and Chief Privacy Officer at Inmar Intelligence, and Ryan Ricardella is Solutions Expert for Healthcare. We welcome both of you guys.
Thank you, Jim.
Nice to be here. Fred, I'm going to start with you. Tell me about Inmar's new Pride group, because you sent me an email that said we have a Pride group, and I want to know all about that, why it's important to establish it.
I think for us it's both fairness and equity as well as business intelligence. I mean, the Harvard Business Review in 2018 showed kind of the more and better diversity you have, the more inclusive you are, the more your revenue grows, and the more profitable you are. And it has significant impact, and it's proportional to the amount of diversity. But it's also about fairness and inclusion and treating people well.
And of course, I know you guys are always in touch with all these issues. We've talked about equity issues, racial equity, and that kind of stuff in the past with some of your colleagues. But Ryan, I'm wondering, sure, it's great that you're doing it, but what was the impetus for trying to get your particular group going, and what did it mean to you personally?
Yeah, so Pride is an LGBTQ plus focus group, and it came about because I had attended a webinar from Wake Forest University's LGBTQ plus center around LGBTQ equity and inclusion best practices. And so I reached out to a few folks and said, hey, would you be interested in implementing this in our own workspace? And got some really good positive reaction. And what we learned from the webinar is that just because we had always felt valued and accepted and appreciated at Inmar for who we are and for the work we do, we can't assume that that's the experience that everyone has, right? And we need to make sure that there is a concerted and visible and intentional effort around making sure people feel welcome and bringing their full selves to work every day.
Almost an outreach inward.
Exactly.
So that you want to make sure everybody's on the same page. Yeah,
exactly. So
inreach. That's a
new word.
That's right. That's why they call you a solutions guy. You come up with solutions. Fred, as I mentioned, we've talked about racial equity before and some of the great things that Inmar has instituted. But now and maybe Ryan can comment on this too, but Fred, is the Pride group interfacing with other groups at Inmar to try to sort of have that interdisciplinary approach to this?
Very much so. I mean, it takes everyone working as kind of a big village. Everyone has different experiences. They're bringing all those experiences in Inmar. They're going to be very different. They're going to have different needs, different wants, different desires. And from our perspective, the more people we have involved in those conversations, the better it is. And there's also uniquely different kind of perspectives from the LGBTQ plus orientation, as well as from kind of the racially diverse crowd. And so we want it all, and we want to understand it all.
And we didn't rehearse this, so I'm going to put Ryan on the spot. But I mean, is there an equity luncheon once every 3 months? Is there a coffee thing that people get together and talk? I'm not being funny, I'm being serious. So people can get together and share and network and whatever. I mean, how is that done?
Yeah, it's a mix of things that we're doing. We're setting the agenda around education, but programming is very much a part of it. And so to your question about how we're integrating our work with some of the other groups, there's a book club. Is one of the first things that we're doing together around talking about inclusivity from an interdisciplinary perspective. Because conversation, education is a big part of it, right? We don't know how to support one another unless we're having those conversations candidly and explicitly. So that's what we're trying to create a platform for.
Before we run out of time, I've got you here, Ryan, and this question may be premature, but have you had a chance to get any sense of feedback on what you're doing?
Yeah, we've been really blown away by the response that we've gotten, both internally and externally. So at every level of the organization, we've gotten really positive support from our executive leadership team, like Fred, which is huge because they really set the tone for the rest of the organization. Right. And we've had folks from IT, sales, everywhere in between wanting to participate and actually asking us about how they can reach out and better connect with people in their own lives, friends and family, which is big. Clients as well have expressed appreciation. So we're really grateful for the enthusiasm, and we're excited about what that means in terms of momentum.
And this is not a flash in the pan thing. It's a long term, right? Long term? Okay. All right, I want to put on screen, inmar.com is a general website, and that'll give you all sorts of information about the company and what they do. And what great community partners Inmar Intelligence the folks are, David Mounts and everybody. Guys, I appreciate this. Will you come back and update me sometime?
Absolutely, we appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
We'll be right back after this. Oh, back now on Triad Today. I'm looking at my brochure, beautiful brochure from Imprints Cares. And instead of me just looking at the brochure, I'm going to put this down. Let's look over at our guest who runs that organization. Next to me, our very special guest, Claudia Barrett, is Executive Director for Imprints Cares. And good to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Very briefly, what's the mission of the organization?
The mission of Imprints Cares is to nurture early children's development while supporting parents on their journey of parenthood.
And, you know, that's a dual track. It's a dual purpose. And as you try to do that, I think you sent me an email one day and said something about that there's a holistic approach to helping both the children and the parents. What did you mean?
That's absolutely right, Jim. So for the last 51 years, Imprints Cares has been serving the marginalized community here in Forsyth County by working with parents to be their child's first best teacher. What we know is that early experiences, early in a child's life, the relationships that they develop with their parents and with significant adults in their life really impacts the trajectory for that child's lifelong learning.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But now in my feeble mind, I'm thinking, well, she's talking about somebody 3 or 4 years old. But didn't I read somewhere that you also emphasize prenatal?
Absolutely.
What in the world do you mean?
Absolutely. So that has everything to do with brain architecture. A child's neurological development begins prior to birth. And so the health of the mother during pregnancy, before pregnancy, is so essential to the biological systems that really nurture that child's brain architecture, the foundation for their lifelong learning abilities.
Has the pandemic, or maybe I should phrase the question, in what ways has the pandemic affected the way that your organization addresses disparities in health and education?
Absolutely. So through our Ready for School programs, our family educators work in partnership with families. And what we know is that the pandemic has impacted all of us, but communities of color have been disproportionately affected. So our family educators and our whole team of staff work very closely to address increased levels of toxic stress. We've seen increased regression in development, so lots of bedwetting issues, temper tantrum issues, and it all stems from isolation, increased stressors due to disparities in access. And we all know that remote learning has really impacted our academic divide,
Sure.
and the inequities in education have truly come to the surface as a result
Some
of that.
kids that don't do well online learning, thousands that don't have access to high-speed internet, and then you got that
Absolutely.
stress and everything else. You know, the good folks at Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust suggested this topic, which I think is great. I'm glad you could come over. But since I mentioned them, what has the support of Kate B. Reynolds meant to your organization?
Absolutely. So over the last few years, the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust has really supported us in expanding our reach into the community, and also the impact we can make in addressing social and health and education disparities. So through 2 programs, one, our Family, Friends, and Neighbor program, which is the highest care for children is really found in those informal caregivers who are typically family, friends, and neighbor. So we're in our 2nd year of our pilot with that program, and we have family educators who really go into the homes of these informal caregivers to provide support, education, and resources. In addition to that, we have our Pediatric Holistic Health Initiative, where we're actually embedded in pediatricians' offices.
I just think that's great. I want to put up on screen a couple of things for people to look at because community support's important too. imprintscares.org. Please check that out, imprintscares.org. And also a shout out to the good folks at KB Reynolds. Their website is kbr.org. Claudia, thanks for everything you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I'm going to hold this up again because it's just beautiful. And people can go to that website. Can they get this through the website or learn more about it?
They can request information.
Okay.
They can access our latest community impact report.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you.
Today, always glad when the good folks at Carolina University can drop by and visit with us, let us know what's going on over there. And also today, we sort of focus on something they're very famous for, which is their divinity school. And we're going to talk to two folks who can tell us all about that. On my immediate right, Dr. Jerry Humlinger, who is a Dean and Professor of Theology at Piedmont Divinity School at Carolina University. And also joining us, Dr. Mark Gregory, Interim Director of the Divinity School. Welcome, guys. Good to see you.
Thanks. Good to see you.
Glad to be with you.
Jerry, let me start with you and just ask what kind of degree programs that you offer through the Divinity School. I think folks would find that interesting.
Well, I would begin by saying that all of our programs are rich in Bible theology ministry. So as a divinity school, that's what we do. On the undergrad side, we have a certificate in Bible, an associate's in Bible, and then a Bachelor of Arts in Biblical Studies. And on the graduate side, we have a Master of Ministry degree, which is very balanced between Bible and theology and ministry, which, by the way, is available not only in English, but Spanish and Portuguese.
Wow.
And we then have a very research-intensive Master of Arts in Biblical Studies, and then a 72-hour Master of Divinity.
And who would, we didn't rehearse this or anything, I'm just curious, somebody goes through those tracks and gets all this knowledge and research and everything, what typically do they go to? What kind of career do they go into other than just the ministry? Do they do in other fields at churches or what?
Yeah, it's really pretty wide open. They can, any kind of pastoral role in a church, educational roles. They can go into parachurch ministries, or sometimes people just want to be more efficient as a layman.
Right,
in that field,
absolutely. Mark, who can benefit from these programs in general? How would you describe that?
Well, certainly the senior pastors, those who are staff ministers on churches, benefit from the additional enhanced work in theology as well as in practical ministry. And then the laypersons, as Jerry mentioned, certainly can benefit. We see that there are a number of individuals who are committed believers and who want to learn more, but to do so in a very sequenced process, with a sequenced process and a learning environment that really allows them to flourish, to gain more biblical knowledge. The ultimate, of course, benefit for these individuals is what they can transfer into their church setting. Sometimes that's in Sunday school, sometimes it's teaching small groups. There's a whole host of individuals who really benefit ultimately from it.
Absolutely, and not just for the younger people, but I guess anybody of any age. I guess my question is, in this day and age where money's tight, do you guys offer any scholarships or incentives for the students?
We do. Carolina University, as a university, has a large capacity for financial assistance. In fact, 96% of our students benefit from financial assistance.
That's great.
Yeah, and that covers the whole gamut of everything from grants all the way to loans, whatever it might be. And I think that's very significant. But there's another component that I think is very beneficial for especially a divinity school student in the master's program. It's called the Piedmont Ministry Scholarship. That program is a 75% scholarship that is applied directly to tuition. In essence, each course costs approximately $297. So you can do a whole 30-hour program for $3,000 or slightly under. This is tuition only. What that means is that for the $3,000 for the whole program, that is comparable to roughly one semester at most other divinity schools.
And of course, that removes that big barrier of cost, which so many students are struggling with this day. Before time runs out, Jerry, let me go back to you. Get a quick plug in for the faculty in general and what they bring to the educational experience quickly.
We are very excited about our faculty. In fact, Mark and I talk about that frequently, whether it's Hebrew, Greek, church history, theology, whatever. Our profs have terminal degrees in those disciplines from some of the most reputable seminaries in the country. They have vast ministry experience, ongoing ministry experience. And something that always amazes me is when I observe them online or in class or outside of class, keen interest in students as individuals.
We've got a key component there, and I know you're proud of them. On screen, before we lose time here, I do want to put this up. divinity.carolinau.edu is the website for the Divinity School, and the general website, carolinau.edu. Please check that out and learn more about Carolina University. Will you gentlemen come back sometime?
Be glad to. Thank you.
Want to learn more about it. Thanks a lot for your help. We'll be right back after this. Today, and for those of us who have had family members suffering with some form of pulmonary disease or condition, we know how important pulmonary rehabilitation is. And that leads me to our first guest who's come down to visit with us. I welcome you to the show. Connie Paladinic, you're Pulmonary Rehab Program Director for Northern Regional Hospital, and you wear many other hats too, and we welcome you to the program.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
What conditions require pulmonary rehabilitation? I mean, are there any, you want to give a couple examples of what somebody might have or need have to go into rehab for?
Well, I think there are a lot of examples. For instance, I think one of the things that probably most people are familiar with would be COPD.
Right, which is
or
what my
chronic
dad had when he was alive, yeah.
Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease.
Right.
But really, what we're learning about pulmonary rehab is that it is really the most effective treatment that is available for people with chronic lung disease.
Trying to build up that lung capacity and just
Absolutely.
at least maintain, you know.
Right, and many other things too. There are so many comorbidities that are associated with chronic lung disease. And although at this time we really don't have the ability to cure chronic lung disease, one of the things that we know that we can do is to improve a lot of the other comorbidities to prevent deconditioning.
Right. How would you, and just very briefly, how would you describe to somebody if they didn't know what pulmonary rehabilitation is, how would you describe what it is?
Well, just briefly, pulmonary rehab is it's a comprehensive, medically directed program that is specifically designed for people with chronic lung disease. And what it does is to focus on their individual specific needs. So there are a lot of things that we might cover.
Like, give me an example if somebody came in with COPD or something and they start rehabilitation with your program. I mean, is there a certain exercise? Give me an example of an exercise or something they might do.
Sure. There are a lot of exercises, and those tend to be specific to each individual because people have so many different comorbidities. But one of the first things that we would want to focus on would be breathing techniques to help people do more with less shortness of breath, because if you can't breathe, nothing else really matters.
Is this, I know this is going to sound like a stupid question, but is pulmonary rehabilitation in general something that's short-term or long-term for a lot of folks? I mean, is there a regimen that just says, okay, after this many weeks, you're done, go on back home and do this and that, or is it an ongoing thing?
That's a great question. Initially, I think there is a phase where people are regaining physical function that they have lost. But one of the things that we really try hard to get our patients to understand is that it's a use it or lose it proposition. Right. It's something just like exercise. You have to keep it up to maintain the benefits. So it really is a lifelong endeavor.
And people, and there's some good lessons, I guess, for all of us, well, especially those who go through pulmonary rehab, lessons to learn that they carry with them through life, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, trying to maintain your health and do some exercise and take it easy and stay in touch with your physician. And but I just think what you're doing and what you offer is just very special, and I just appreciate all the work you're doing. I want to put something up on screen, just the general website for Northern Regional. It's choosenorthern.org is the website. Say it again for the radio listening audience, www.choosenorthern.org. triadtoday.org, and that can lead you to other information and services that they offer there. But Connie, thanks for all the good work you do.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be with you today.
All right, thanks a lot. We'll be right back. Well, back now on Triad Today, just about time for the roundtable. Quick shout out to Adrienne Rothling and her team here at the Senior Botanical Garden. Beautiful place to visit. Speaking of that, you can visit their website. It's on screen, seniorbotanicalgarden.org. And now to the roundtable on my right, but always political left, Ogie Overman, the great broadcaster and journalist. Socially distanced behind us is the lovely Taylor Woods, who is CEO of Ashtay Products, which is, you ship products everywhere, don't you?
Yeah, U.S., Canada, Caribbean islands.
Right, that's great. Now, can your products make me more attractive?
Hey, we can't not work miracles.
Good answer.
This will be Taylor's last appearance on the roundtable. And then also back there is my good buddy, my son, Keith Granberry, founder of Helping Hands Consultants. All right, guys, gals, Wells Fargo is now giving employees 8 hours of paid leave to go get a COVID vaccine. Would you like to see all companies do that, Ogie?
I would. You know, small companies maybe can't afford 8 hours, but they could give them time off enough and just pay them for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours to do it. Yeah.
What do you think, Taylor?
I think the same thing. Whatever small businesses can afford to do, then make it happen. And those that can afford 8 hours, run the money.
Mr. Granberry.
Absolutely. I think they should have the whole day off, which is the 8 hours, so to get it done.
Now,
Absolutely.
the second question is kind of complicated. I'll try to simplify it. You know, we don't want to see anyone evicted from their house or apartment. That's a given. And we know that the extensions of not evicting people have happened during the pandemic. But also, if you look at statistics, overwhelming. I mean, it's almost like 90% of the landlords are small businesses, mom and pops, who, they rely on that revenue, rent revenue, whatever, to feed their families. Guys and gals, I guess the question is, how much longer should we keep extending the moratorium on evictions for folks? Oh,
Well, that's a good point, Jim. You don't think about it from that angle, but somehow it feels like the landlord should be compensated somehow in the bill. I don't guess it was. I don't think it was.
In the COVID
in
bill.
the relief bill.
What do you think, Taylor?
Right. I think if they're not going to lift the eviction moratoriums, then the government needs to pay landlords directly. 12 months of rent cannot be sustained from the $3,000, $3,500 we've been given.
Keith.
Yeah, I think that the government needs to put a bill to pay these landlords, but you can't evict people. I was in Portland, Oregon, where homelessness is crazy, and we know what happens if you're not able to pay your bills, and it particularly hurts people who are most in need of this. So I think you're going to have to pay, but you cannot kick these people out of their places.
All right, changing the subject, a black police officer in Florida was fired last week for using the N-word during an arrest. They caught it on one of the body cams or something. Guys and gals, should police officers of any color be fired for using a racial slur during an arrest? Ogie.
No, people need to realize it's different. It's just different from me calling you a cracker
Right.
than the N-word. It's just different when a black man says it to another black man. It means something different from a white guy.
What's your take on it, Taylor?
I think it should be the same across the board
For everybody?
for everybody.
He should have been fired.
Yep.
Keith.
Yeah, especially when you're working, it's different if you're out with your friends, and even it shouldn't be called that word, because the word is a derogatory word no matter who says it. But especially when you're working, you're going to have to let that person go, because you can't have one rule for one person, one rule for another.
All right, Governor Cooper recently ordered the release of 3,500 inmates in an effort to prevent the spread of COVID. The NAACP and other organizations were fully behind this, really pushed him toward it, and a lot of people are applauding the move. My question is, are you okay with letting criminals out of prison, even though it's for a good reason? Ogie.
If they're nonviolent offenders, if it's possession of marijuana or something, I'm fine with that, but not murderers and rapists. And
Ms. Woods.
Right. We're talking about people who are at the end of their time. If they're being sent home in order to mitigate the spread of COVID in the middle of this pandemic, I'm fine with it.
Mr. Granberry.
You know how I feel about the Justice Department and people in there who are not supposed to be in there, people in there getting longer sentences than they're supposed to have in the first place. So I think they should be allowing people out. And with the spread of this COVID-19, you're going to have to let people out. And I don't know why you wouldn't wouldn't do that across the board.
All right. An increasing number of college students are pushing to extend the pass-fail policy that was created due to the pandemic, and now a lot of high schools are looking at it as well. And high schools, meanwhile, are lowering GPA requirements for student athletes. There are a lot of concessions being made because of the pandemic. Do you think that this is going to help or hurt students in the long run? Even things like eliminating the essay question on the SAT. It seems like there are a lot of things being, the bar keeps getting lowered and saying it was because of the pandemic. Does it hurt or help students in the long run, Ogie?
That's another tough one, Jim. I don't like pass-fail, I never have, but I'm thinking under these dire circumstances, maybe we do have to make some concessions, and you got to move the kids along somehow. I don't like standardized tests either.
Yeah, Taylor?
Unfortunately, I think that these concessions are not only going to hurt the students, but honestly, the community as a whole. The less educated people are, the more issues we're going to have down the long term.
Because we're not really going to be able to make up, to use the term, make up what we've lost with some of this stuff. Keith, I know that a lot of kids in Guilford, I think like 2,000 of them didn't even have access to online learning. So there are definitely some disparities and problems during the pandemic, but making all these concessions academically, what do you think quickly?
I think number one, when you said student athlete, you should not be making concessions just for student athlete. I was a basketball player, you should not be making concessions for student athletes. But I do think the standardized tests need to be changed to be more accurate to what they're dealing with, but they should not do away with them. Absolutely not.
All right, finally, one of the fastest growing trends in physical fitness is something called chicken yoga, where humans practice yoga alongside of a live chicken. Guys and gals, have you ever done yoga with a chicken? Ogie?
I've never done yoga, period, so I don't know how to answer
With
that,
or without
Jim.
a chicken?
With or without.
Taylor, would you do yoga with a chicken?
I wouldn't do it with a chicken, but I would do goat yoga.
Goat yoga?
Yeah, it's a thing.
That's weird, Taylor. Keith, would you do yoga with a chicken?
I think because of my legs are so skinny, people thought I was doing yoga with a chicken.
Holy mackerel. Let me also say that Taylor will be leaving after this, and she's going to be taking Keith with her. That's something maybe you didn't know. All right, for all of us here on the Triad Today, I'm Jim Longworth. We'll see you next week.